Patrick Henry was a Virginia lawyer and orator whose fiery words helped ignite the American Revolution. Patrick Henry, one of America's most influential founding fathers, was born on May 29, 1736 in Studley, Hanover County, Virginia. He came from a modest but respectable family. His father was a Scottish immigrant and a planter. Henry had a commanding presence when he spoke. His early business ventures were unsuccessful. He was largely self-educated and tried his hand at farming and storekeeping, but both enterprises failed. Then in 1760, after just 6 weeks of legal study, the 24-year-old Henry obtained his law license and began practicing law in the Virginia courts. Patrick Henry was not born into wealth or privilege. He had to make his own way in the world through his natural talents and his gift for public speaking. In 1763, Henry gained widespread fame with his argument in the Parsons Cause case. He challenged the authority of the British Crown to override Virginia law. Henry argued that a king who would veto beneficial colonial legislation forfeited the right to his subjects' obedience. This was radical thinking for the time. The case made Henry's reputation as a defender of colonial rights and a brilliant courtroom advocate. In 1765, Henry was elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses. Within days of taking his seat, he introduced the Virginia Resolves opposing the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was Britain's attempt to tax the American colonies directly. Henry's resolves declared that only Virginia's colonial assembly had the right to tax Virginians. When Henry presented his resolves, he gave a passionate speech. Some witnesses reported that he said, "Caesar had his Brutus, Charles I his Cromwell, and George III." At this point, cries of treason interrupted him. Henry supposedly concluded, "May profit by their example. If this be treason, make the most of it." Patrick Henry was becoming known as one of the most radical voices in the colonies. He was not a man who minced words or sought compromise when he believed fundamental principles were at stake. His Virginia resolves were printed in newspapers throughout the colonies and helped spark widespread resistance to the Stamp Act. Other colonial assemblies passed similar resolutions. The Stamp Act was eventually repealed, and Henry's role in that victory made him a colonial hero. Henry continued to serve in the House of Burgesses throughout the late 1760s and early 1770s. He consistently opposed British policies that he saw as infringing on colonial liberties. He was a member of the Committees of Correspondence that helped coordinate resistance among the colonies. Unlike some of the other founding fathers, Henry was not a wealthy plantation owner or a Boston merchant. He was a self-made lawyer who spoke for the common people. His oratory style was emotional and direct, appealing to the hearts of his listeners. In 1774, Henry was elected as a delegate to the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. There he met other colonial leaders like John Adams, Samuel Adams, and George Washington. Henry made a strong impression on his fellow delegates. John Adams later wrote that Henry was the completest speaker I ever heard. At the Congress, Henry famously declared, "The distinctions between Virginians, Pennsylvanians, New Yorkers, and New Englanders are no more. I am not a Virginian, but an American." This statement showed Henry's vision of a unified American nation, not just separate colonies. The situation between Britain and the colonies continued to deteriorate. In March 1775, Henry attended the Second Virginia Convention in Richmond. The convention was debating whether Virginia should prepare for military action against Britain. Many delegates favored a more cautious approach, hoping for reconciliation. Patrick Henry had no such illusions. He believed that war was inevitable and that Virginia needed to prepare its militia immediately. On March 23, 1775, Henry rose to speak in favor of arming the Virginia militia. What followed was perhaps the most famous speech in American history. Henry began by acknowledging the gravity of the situation and the different opinions in the room. He said he had to speak his mind, no matter the personal cost. Henry reviewed the history of colonial attempts to reconcile with Britain. He pointed out that all petitions had been met with violence and insult. He argued that the colonies had done everything possible to avoid conflict, but Britain had responded by sending troops and warships. Patrick Henry told the delegates that they should not deceive themselves. The war had already begun. The next gale from the north would bring the clash of arms to Virginia. He asked what the colonists had to fight with if they delayed preparation. Would they be stronger in a year? Would British forces be weaker? He argued that the colonies would never be stronger than they were at that moment. Delay would only weaken their position. Henry addressed those who hoped for peace. He said there was no peace. The war had already started. Their brethren in the north were already in the field. He asked why the delegates should stand idle. What did they wish? What would they have? He declared that life was so dear and peace so sweet that they should be purchased at the price of chains and slavery. Then came the immortal words that would echo through American history, "Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." The effect of Henry's speech was electric. Witnesses reported that the audience sat in stunned silence, then erupted in approval. The convention voted to arm the Virginia militia. Less than a month later, on April 19, 1775, the Revolutionary War began with the battles of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. Patrick Henry's words had helped prepare Virginia and the colonies for the conflict that was to come. His speech became a rallying cry for the Revolution. In August 1775, Henry was appointed commander of Virginia's colonial forces. He was not a professional soldier like George Washington. His military service was brief and not particularly distinguished. Henry's talents lay in politics and oratory, not military command. In 1776, he resigned his military commission and was elected as the first governor of the independent Commonwealth of Virginia. He served 3 one-year terms as governor from 1776 to 1779. During his governorship, Henry worked to support the war effort and establish the new state government. Patrick Henry was a strong supporter of independence and individual liberty. However, he was also a complicated figure. Like George Washington and many other Virginia leaders, Henry was a slaveholder. He owned slaves throughout his life, though he expressed discomfort with the institution. He once wrote that slavery was as repugnant to humanity as it is inconsistent with the Bible and destructive to liberty. Yet he continued to own slaves and did not free them during his lifetime. This contradiction between his words about liberty and his actions regarding slavery troubled Henry himself and troubles historians today. After his first stint as governor, Henry returned to the House of Delegates. He continued to be a powerful voice in Virginia politics. In 1784, he was elected governor again, serving 2 more one-year terms. During this period, Henry advocated for religious freedom and supported the separation of church and state. He initially opposed Thomas Jefferson's statute for religious freedom, favoring instead a general tax to support all Christian denominations. However, James Madison's arguments eventually prevailed, and Virginia adopted Jefferson's more radical approach. In 1787, the Constitutional Convention met in Philadelphia to draft a new framework for the national government. Patrick Henry was elected as a delegate but refused to attend. He said he'd smelt a rat in Philadelphia, tending toward the monarchy. Henry was deeply suspicious of centralized power. He feared that a strong national government would threaten individual liberties and states' rights. When the proposed constitution was presented to the states for ratification, Henry became one of its most vocal opponents. Patrick Henry was the leading anti-federalist in Virginia. He believed the Constitution gave too much power to the federal government at the expense of the states. He feared that the president could become a tyrant. He worried that Congress would abuse its taxation powers. He was particularly concerned that the Constitution, as originally written, contained no Bill of Rights to protect individual liberties. At the Virginia Ratifying Convention in 1788, Henry gave speech after speech opposing ratification. Henry's oratory at the Ratifying Convention was as powerful as ever. He spoke for hours, painting vivid pictures of the dangers he saw in the Constitution. He asked his fellow Virginians to consider what they were giving up. He warned that the new government could destroy the liberties they had fought a revolution to secure. He argued that the Constitution should be amended before ratification, not after. His speeches were so effective that the outcome of the Virginia Convention was in doubt until the very end. James Madison, Edmund Randolph, and other Federalists defended the Constitution. They argued that a stronger national government was necessary to hold the young nation together. They promised that a Bill of Rights would be added through the amendment process once the Constitution was ratified. George Washington's support for the Constitution also carried great weight in Virginia. In the end, Virginia ratified the Constitution by a narrow vote of 89 to 79. Patrick Henry had lost the battle, but his opposition helped ensure that a Bill of Rights would be added to the Constitution. Henry's insistence on a Bill of Rights was perhaps his greatest contribution to American government. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution, ratified in 1791, protected freedom of speech, religion, the press, and assembly. They guaranteed the right to bear arms and to trial by jury. They protected against unreasonable searches and seizures and cruel and unusual punishment. These protections reflected many of the concerns Henry had raised during the ratification debates. Without Henry's opposition, the Bill of Rights might never have been adopted. After the Constitution was ratified, Henry retired from public life for a time. He returned to his law practice and his family. Henry had been married twice and fathered 17 children. His first wife, Sarah Shelton, whom he married in 1754, died in 1775 after a long illness. In 1777, he married Dorothea Dandridge, a wealthy widow. Henry's law practice flourished in the 1790s. He became one of the most successful and highly paid lawyers in Virginia. He represented clients in important cases throughout the state. Patrick Henry remained a respected elder statesman. Both Federalists and Democratic Republicans sought his support. President Washington offered Henry positions as Secretary of State, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and Minister to Spain, but Henry declined all these appointments. He preferred to remain in Virginia with his family. However, Henry did not completely withdraw from politics. He continued to speak out on issues he cared about. In the late 1790s, Henry became alarmed by what he saw as the excesses of the Democratic-Republican Party. He was particularly troubled by the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which claimed that states could nullify federal laws they deemed unconstitutional. These resolutions were written by Madison and Jefferson in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts. Henry believed the resolutions went too far and threatened the Union. In his final years, he moved closer to the Federalist position, supporting a strong national government to preserve the Union. In 1799, Patrick Henry was persuaded to run for the Virginia House of Delegates one more time. At 63, he was in declining health, but he felt compelled to oppose the Virginia resolutions and defend the Union. He campaigned in the spring of 1799, giving speeches despite his physical weakness. In one of his last public speeches, Henry warned against the dangers of disunion. He said that the Union must be preserved and that Virginians should support the federal government. He won election but never took his seat. On June 6, 1799, Patrick Henry died at his estate, Red Hill, in Charlotte County, Virginia. He was 63 years old. His death was mourned throughout the nation. Newspapers praised his contributions to American independence and liberty. His liberty or death speech was already legendary. Henry was remembered as one of the great voices of the Revolution, a man whose words had inspired a nation to fight for freedom. Patrick Henry's legacy is complex and enduring. He was not a political theorist like Jefferson or Madison. He did not command armies like Washington. He did not help draft the Constitution. What Henry contributed was his voice. His passionate oratory moved people to action. His words at the Virginia Convention in 1775 helped push the colonies toward revolution. His opposition to the Constitution helped secure the Bill of Rights. His defense of individual liberty and limited government influenced American political thought for generations. Henry was a man of contradictions. He spoke eloquently of liberty while owning slaves. He opposed centralized power but supported the Union. He was a radical revolutionary who became more conservative in his later years. These contradictions make him a more human and more interesting historical figure. He was not a marble statue but a real person struggling with the great questions of his time. Patrick Henry believed that liberty was worth any sacrifice. He believed that individuals should be free to govern themselves and that government power should be limited. He believed that rights came from God, not from government, and that those rights should be protected. These beliefs were at the heart of the American Revolution and remain central to American political culture today. When Americans debate the proper role of government, the balance between federal and state power, and the protection of individual rights, they are continuing arguments that Patrick Henry helped to frame. In death, Patrick Henry was remembered as the voice of the Revolution. His words had helped birth a nation. His insistence on protecting individual liberty had helped shape the Constitution through the Bill of Rights. He remains one of the most quotable of the Founding Fathers. "Give me liberty or give me death" continues to resonate as a statement of the American commitment to freedom. Patrick Henry was, in life and in memory, the orator who spoke for liberty,